Good morning, Bucknutters. Welcome to the Bucknuts Morning 5 here on Monday, April 2nd, 2018. I am Dave Biddle, and I'm joined by the Dean of Ohio State football recruiting, Bill Kurelic. And if you're a recruiting fan, you're going to love today's show because what we're going to do is we're going to go down and Bill is going to give you the scoop on 12 of the top targets on Ohio State's board. Not the top 12, but 12 of the top targets on Ohio State's board for the 2019 recruiting class. We'll start right at the top, Dean, and this guy's right in your backyard as well. Olentangy Orange, Zach Harrison, number 2 weak side defensive end in the country, number 3 overall player in the country. How do the Buckeyes stand with Zach Harrison?
Well, you are right. He is indeed right in my backyard. My kids went to Orange High School. I know the Harrison family well, and he's no question, a priority guy for the Buckeyes. And in the end, I really continue to think it's going to come down to either Ohio State or Penn State. We'll see. He is going to take his visits. In fact, he visited Clemson and Georgia this past week while Orange was on spring break. But in talking to a source again at Orange just recently, again, the feeling is still there that right now, Ohio State probably has a lead over Penn State, but again, I think he'll take official visits to both and make his decision, and I think he'll take some other official visits as well. But he's a guy that Ohio State absolutely wants very badly to get in this recruiting class.
At quarterback, Grant Gunnell from St. Pius X, Houston, Texas, number 2 pro-style quarterback in the country. Number 53 overall. I believe you crystal balled him to Ohio State. What's the latest with Grant Gunnell?
Well, I did indeed give the crystal ball to Ohio State for him. And, the way I look at it is Ohio State's really looking hard at 4 quarterbacks, and Grant Gunnell being one of them. Sam Howell is another one. Certainly, Sam Howell's a great quarterback and could well be at the very top of the list, but I just don't think that the chances are great that he's going to end up at Ohio State. I think the chances are better that Gunnell will. Gunnell had a great visit with the Buckeyes, and it just went extremely well. And because of that, I picked Gunnell as my crystal ball over Sam Howell. Then Ohio State is looking hard at a couple other quarterbacks as well. One of them being Max Duggan out of Iowa, and again, I don't think the chances are great that he ends up at Ohio State. And then Jaden Daniels at California, who, I don't think the chances are great right now that he ends up at Ohio State. So that was a part of the reason that I crystal balled Gunnell to Ohio State.
Devontae Dobbs, the number 1 offensive tackle in the country, number 9 overall player in the country, kid out of Belleville, Michigan. How do the Buckeyes stand with Dobbs?
Well, Dobbs is a guy that's been to Ohio State many, many times. And he is, thinking about coming back down to Ohio State for the spring game. Right now if I was going to crystal ball Dobbs right now, I would definitely crystal ball him at this point to Michigan State. We'll see what happens, but I think that's probably, the likely place he goes at this point. But as he told me when he was in Cleveland not too long ago, Ohio State has done a great job recruiting him, and if anything, Ohio State is gaining stature with him. While some people feel Ohio State has been dropping with him, he said actually it's the opposite. Ohio State is gaining with him at this point.
That's good news for the Buckeyes. And sticking with offensive tackles, I know they're going to load up on offensive linemen in this class. They already are loading up on offensive linemen. 2 of the 3 commits in the class are, of course, offensive linemen. But another top target, of course, Darnell Wright, number 3 offensive tackle in the country, number 21 overall prospect in the country, according to the 24/7 Sports Composite. Kid out of Huntington, West Virginia. How do the Buckeyes stand with Wright?
Yeah, he's a really tough guy to get a read on. He has been to Ohio State multiple times. Certainly there's an interest there on his part. But I also feel like he's got a pretty good interest in some of the SEC schools. He is in Kentucky, he's in West Virginia, and while that's not SEC country, certainly it's not too far away from some of the SEC schools that would make those schools enticing for him. Obviously, Ohio State is just across the border for him in Huntington, West Virginia. But I know he has an interest certainly in Alabama and some of the other SEC schools, and really hard to say which way he's going to go at this point. I know some people feel like Ohio State would be the leader for him at this point, but in all my conversations with Darnell, he's never really said he has any particular leader, and I believe him. I think he's going to continue to evaluate and look at schools and then make his decision.
Brandon Smith is the number 1 inside linebacker in the country, number 19 overall prospect out of Mineral, Virginia. Are the Buckeyes kind of a long shot for Brandon Smith, or just where do they stand?
No, I don't think Ohio State's a long shot at all for Brandon Smith. You know, he's been up here to Columbus. He's visited Ohio State, and he's told me what a great time he had. Again, like Darnell Wright, he's a hard guy to get a read on a little bit, and that he's pretty non-committal as far as who might be on the top of his list. But I think it's safe to say that, at least in my opinion, Ohio State has just about as good a chance as anybody at landing Brandon Smith. And by the way, even though he's listed as a defensive end a lot of times, Ohio State is recruiting him as a linebacker, and he's a guy that Ohio State would love to get to add to their linebacker core.
Garrett Wilson, we know somebody on Ohio State's roster is familiar with him. He's a wide receiver from Lake Travis, Austin, Texas, of course. High school teammates with Matthew Baldwin. He's the number 6 wide receiver in the country, number 46 overall prospect in the country. Buckeyes in pretty good standing with Garrett Wilson.
Yeah, he's a guy that I crystal ball to Ohio State. And I was talking to a source on the Texas side of things last night. I know Garrett Wilson and his family very well. In fact, his older brother, Cam Wilson, played some on my AAU basketball team that I coached. So I'm very familiar. Back when I was coaching Cam Wilson, Garrett Wilson was just a little guy running around back in those days. And, with the bloodlines in that family, his dad, an ex-NFL player and all that, with the bloodlines in that family, there was not a whole lot of doubt that Garrett was probably going to be an outstanding athlete as well, and he has turned out to be just that. It's going to come down to Ohio State or Texas. As I posted on Bucknuts on Saturday night, he will make an official visit to Ohio State for the Buckeye spring game, April 14th. Then he makes one to Texas the following weekend, April 21st. Then he's going to come up with his decision. And as I was talking about with a source from Texas last night, we both agreed that right now that Ohio State would have the edge for his services. And we'll see what happens on the visit. But it's always great when you're going into the visit, as I believe Ohio State is, as the slight leader, that it's your job to keep that lead rather than to have to make up ground.
Going into Tom Herman's backyard and taking one away from him, if it pans out that way. That'll be very interesting. Moving right along here, Buckeyes already have a running back in this class with Samson James, of course, from Indiana, but they'd like to add another one, looks like, and Devyn Ford's one of the guys on their list, kid out of Stafford, Virginia. Devyn Ford ranked as the number 6 running back in the country, number 73 overall prospect. Where do the Buckeyes stand with Devyn Ford, Bill?
Quiet kid, so it's hard to say for sure, where exactly Ohio State is on his list. Other than I think I'm very confident in saying that Ohio State would be in his top 3. He is going to make official visits to 3 schools, and they will be in consecutive weeks this month. I can say we are finally here in April, even though we've got 3 inches of snow outside. We're finally here in April, so I can say this month when I talk about official visits are officially here. But Devyn is going to visit on consecutive weeks here, starting April 14th, Virginia Tech, followed by Penn State, and then Ohio State. So that gives the Buckeyes the last shot. And which way he goes among those 3, I think that's it's just too close to call right now. But again, he's a tremendous prospect that has been to Ohio State before, so he's familiar with the Buckeyes, and I think Ohio State certainly is right there along with the other 2 for his services.
Jalen Curry is high school teammates with Grant Gunnell at St. Pius X in Houston. Jalen Curry ranked as the number 18 wide receiver in the country, number 92 overall according to the composite. Where do the Buckeyes stand with Jalen Curry, Bill?
Yeah, not only is he a teammate of Grant Gunnell, but they certainly are friends, and obviously they've talked about potentially going to the same school together, and Ohio State being one of the top contenders. And Curry is scheduled to visit Ohio State officially for the spring game, and we'll see. I would not completely rule out a commitment, although. The other school to keep in mind right now with Curry is LSU. And I've been told by a source pretty close to that situation that those are the two schools he really talks about a lot, LSU and Ohio State. So we'll see what happens. But, again, we're talking about some great, great prospects, and it seems like almost, so many of them, I've mentioned that Ohio State is in their top 2-3 schools, and, of course, that's a great thing for the Buckeyes.
We already talked about Zach Harrison. We are going to talk about two more Ohio prospects. I love talking about the Ohio kids. First one, Cade Stover. Cade Stover, number outside linebacker in the country, number 123 overall prospect in the country. Lexington, Ohio. Buckeyes in good standing with Cade Stover?
Yeah, he's, as I like to refer to Cade as, he's kind of a commitment in waiting for the Buckeyes. He's told me for quite a long time that Ohio State not only is his leader, but his big leader. He will get back down to Ohio State sometime this spring. Not exactly sure yet when, he tells me, but he will get back down to Ohio State. He has an official visit scheduled to the Oklahoma Sooners spring game on April 14th, but I don't see him doing anything as far as making a commitment without getting back to Ohio State, because he really loves the Buckeyes. And by the way, he's a tremendous athlete. I think Steve Hellwagen had a report on him that in the state Final Four basketball tournament against Akron St. Vincent St. Mary, Cade led his team to the state Final Four in hoops, and just a tremendous athlete that, as long as Ohio State really continues to push for him and all, I can't see him going anywhere else.
Great news for the Buckeyes. I'm sticking in the Buckeye State. Zeke Correll from Cincinnati Anderson, same school that produced Andrew Norwell. Zeke Correll, the number 10 offensive guard in the country, number 205 overall. Buckeyes in good standing with Correll or Correll.
Dave, you had to mention Andrew Norwell and make me feel old. Signing that big NFL contract and being an NFL veteran now. It seems like yesterday that I was watching Andrew Norwell play high school football. But as you said, Zeke is from a same Cincinnati school, and Zeke's an outstanding prospect. When up in Cleveland a number of weeks ago, he earned an invitation to the Under Armour, or I should say the Under Armour All-American game down in Florida, and he deserved that invitation. He performed extremely well. I think in the end there's a decent chance his decision will come down to either Ohio State or Notre Dame. He's been to both places, likes them both. He is continuing to take visits and trips, but I think right now, I'd say that those are the two schools that I would most look at as far as destinations when I talk about Zeke, either Ohio State or Notre Dame.
All right, two more guys. I want to get you out of here real quick, and I'm gonna try and pronounce this guy's name correctly. Ane Izuchukwu, number 12, weak side defensive end in the country, number 237 overall. He's out of Nashville, Tennessee. What's the latest with him?
You were pretty close there. It's Chukwu, but that was close enough, Dave. But
Izuchukwu?
Yeah. Yep.
Izuchukwu. Okay.
And what a great kid. I've talked to him many times. Always enjoy. He's one of those guys that if you call him and you miss him, at least with me, he calls me right back, and he's always – I think he's smiling on the end of the phone, it seems like. Just you could tell he's a great personality. What a nice kid. But also a great football player, by the way. I watched him at Friday Night Lights, was very, very impressed with him. I think in the end, I think his top two right now, I know his top two right now are pretty much Ohio State and Alabama. Those are the two schools that he's told me are on top. He's got a couple other visits in mind. In fact, he probably will take all 5 visits. But right now, the two that he really likes to stand out would be Ohio State and Alabama, just ahead of a couple other schools.
last but certainly not least on our list here, I know a kid that Ohio State feels very good about. You can elaborate on that. But Jordan Battle, number 30 safety in the country, number 353 overall player in the country out of the pipeline of St. Thomas Aquinas in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Buckeyes obviously in good standing with Battleville.
Yeah, and there's a number of guys that Ohio State is involved with at Aquinas High School. We all know that they have a lot of great players at that program, but Battle is the guy that's foremost at the top of the list right now as far as Ohio State is concerned, and he's a guy that I've crystal balled him to Ohio State, which that basically tells you what I'm thinking, because I don't like to throw out the crystal balls right and left, because I don't like to make them and then go ahead and change them a few weeks later or a month later or whatever. I like to try to, if at all possible, to stay with one crystal ball pick and go with that, ride that. But in his case, as I mentioned, I crystal balled Battle to Ohio State, and that's been a little while, and nothing has really happened to change my mind. I still think that there's an outstanding chance he's going to be a Buckeye in the end.
Great stuff from the Dean of Ohio State football recruiting, Bill Kurelic. Would expect nothing less from you, my friend. So thank you very much to the Dean. That was a lot of good information there. And thanks to all listeners out there for tuning into the show. Quick programming note, we will interview Urban Meyer today after Ohio State's practice around 11:45-ish. So we'll have video, stories, and everything else about what Urban Meyer has to say after practice today. Thanks again to Bill Kurelic, and thanks to all listeners out there for tuning into the show. I appreciate it. Hope you have a great day. Let's hear that Buckeye swag, best damn band in the land.